My name is Nick Grossman. I'm Managing Director at Civic Commons, which is a new nonprofit startup that aims to help governments make better use of technologies. And for the past 5 years, I've been working with another civic technology nonprofit called Open Plans, starting new businesses that build civic technology, generally with a focus on urban planning and transportation. So I've been shoulder deep in the world of open data and open source and how governments take advantage of both, and helping and just have been a watcher and a participant in the broader civic technology space that includes startups and government initiatives and all kinds of other activities to help technology work better for cities and for governments and for people. The vision for Civic Commons is that governments can make better use of their technology investments, can provide better government services, can lay the foundation for more effective democratic processes by making smarter and different kinds of technology investments. And specifically, we're focusing on helping governments collaborate around the creation of what you might consider the core infrastructure of a government. So what are the the elements of the operating system of a government, if you will. We believe those components are relatively standard and should be shared. The creation of those can be built in a collaborative process among governments in different cities and different parts of the world in an open source way in order to reduce the overall cost of producing this basic infrastructure. So part one is that governments are spending too much money duplicating a lot of effort in order to build the basic infrastructure, their basic technology infrastructure, and we believe through a collaborative process, through open source work empowered by the internet, we can move towards a more effective set of tools to power cities. And then the second part of that is that there's a sort of a fundamentally different approach to how governments and cities manage their technology that's been brewing, and it's embodied in this notion of government as a platform, which is an idea that Tim O'Reilly from O'Reilly Media has been championing, which is that if you think about the city or a government as an operating system and providing a platform upon which other actors, whether they're nonprofit organizations or community groups or entrepreneurs can build applications, then you architect that technology, you build that technology out in quite a different way. So rather than building every service end to end as a closed single-use application, you say, how could we build this in an open way so that it creates a surface area for other people to engage with. For instance, if you're building, and this is an area that we've spent a lot of time in, if you're building an app for citizens to report problems that are in the city, a broken fire hydrant or a pothole or whatever, one approach would be to build that application as a standalone application. The platform approach would be to build that as an application programming interface that other people could hook their apps into, so that people can create a whole variety of apps until you unlock the innovative potential of entrepreneurs and other actors in the community, and basically the same way that the iPhone has been incredibly successful because you could build apps for the iPhone. The iPhone is a platform now. Before the iPhone, every phone came with the apps that it came with. You didn't even call them apps. Every phone did what it did. Yeah. Government has kind of been the same way, and so if government can think about being more like an iPhone and less like a old Nokia phone, that's sort of the general direction that we're pushing for. And so we are working on helping to specify and understand what those core endpoints might be for the government as an operating system, if you will. And for each of those, we'd like to work towards the creation of a standard way of implementing that, so that when New York City creates its system for issue reporting, its API for issue reporting, San Francisco does theirs the same way, and Tokyo does theirs the same way, and Seoul and Buenos Aires right now. So if cities are implementing, or have a view into their operations in a standard way, you can mine that data and you can learn more about how your own city is operating and also how it compares worldwide. And then you can also start to share applications. So if you have a standard way of doing, say, 3-on-1 in New York, and someone builds a really great app that talks to that, that same app should be able to work in Tokyo, and it should be able to work in Vancouver. And on the one hand, the idea that if governments work together, they can create a common set of tools to power their infrastructure. And on the other hand, if they do that infrastructure in an open way that enables other participants to build on top of, there's a huge innovative potential there. You can think about the way new technology is affecting government on a few different levels. One is about increasing efficiency and saving costs and sort of improving the core functionality of government. That's not what you're asking about, and that's a big component of what we're interested in. But the larger and more important question really is, what's this doing for governance, and how is it changing the models of how governments operate, not just what tools do they use. And clearly that's a much more nascent space where there are a handful of interesting examples, but no shining top to bottom case study of how to do everything. There's a great article in the Wall Street Journal by Mark Andreessen, who was the founder of Netscape, hugely successful visionary for the internet, and he was talking about how all kinds of industries are being disrupted by the application of technology and collapsing inefficiencies and creating new businesses overnight that are influential and really change the landscape. And his point was that almost the tools are there for any institution to be really substantially altered by this set of technologies. And so back to the question of how is this technology affecting governance, I think what's interesting is that all the ingredients, all the tools are on the table for people to start making that happen now. So there's lots of mobile phone usage. There's internet in lots more places than there used to be. There's a greater familiarity and comfort with social networking tools. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. These are the ingredients, for experiments. These are sort of the elements that are necessary for these kinds of experiments to be possible. And so you're seeing examples in different places that are testing this out, because now the tools are there for us to actually try it. For instance, in New York City, Open Plans, where I've worked for a number of years, helped the Department of Transportation create a very simple website which lets people vote for where they'd like to see bike racks for the bike share program that's coming up. Just stick a pin on a map and say, I'd like to see a bike rack here, and here's why. In the first 2 or 3 days that this launched, since last week, there have been over 5,000 suggestions and something like 20,000 votes in the system. And this is like a really, really, really micro example of opening up the engagement and governance, if you will, process. But it was immediately popular. And if you did try to do the same thing 2 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that kind of uptake. And so that's really interesting. If I'm correct, I believe Iceland used a wiki process to help gather input and revise elements of their constitution. I can't say enough about that particular example, but that's got to be fascinating to look at. And you're sort of seeing little experiments like this all over the place that are where people are trying this out. But I don't think that there's a definitive way yet, or really like a solid answer you can say about what's working and what's not working. Well, so it's commonly stated that technology is not the answer, tools are not the answer. You're dealing with human processes, and you can't just throw technology at something and expect everything to change. You have to be very sensitive to and really you have to center your focus on the human process. On the one hand, technology is not where it's at. On the other hand, technology is everywhere that it's at, because everything is about software, and everything's about technology, and the number of connections that we have as individuals and as a society that are virtual outnumber the ones that we have that are physical, probably, and we're moving in that direction. So I think technology is absolutely at the center of all of it, but I'm also not a techno-utopian that thinks technology is going to save the world, but I think technology is going to change the world, and it already is changing the world. And so you have to look at all of these changes with, at the same time, a view of the social and political processes that you're dealing with and that you're affecting, and then also have an understanding of the dynamics that the application of technology brings into that environment, so you can try to have some small sense of where things may go once you mash all these things together. one thing that seems somewhat clear to me is that from the perspective of Civic Commons and open plans to a large extent, what we've been hoping to do is help public agencies understand and implement a different kind of internal infrastructure. And we believe that technical approach in terms of collaborative technology development and open technology development leads to better public outcomes in terms of cost savings and potential for innovation. And as a nonprofit, we can say that in such a way that it's clear that our interests as an organization and our mission are aligned with the interests of our public sector partners. And so in that case, I think it has made sense for us to be a nonprofit initiative to help build a new type of infrastructure. And then I like the idea that we're laying fertile ground for-profit companies to build innovative services, to experiment, to be retail. And there's probably an opportunity for nonprofits there as well. But I think it's been easier for us to justify the financing of this core infrastructure with a nonprofit model because it's so aligned with our public partners. I think it's definitely an ecosystem, and it definitely takes interest and effort and contribution from folks in all sectors. You've got to have folks inside government who are creative and willing to bet on the future a little bit and take some risks and do things in a different way and do some experiments. You've got to have folks in the foundation sector who understand some of what's going on and are willing to invest in some ideas. And you've got to have nonprofits who can fulfill the roles that nonprofits can play uniquely, and then you've got to have an ecosystem of entrepreneurs. I don't know that any one of them is the most important, but I don't think any of it works without each of them. I will probably take the easy answer and say that the private sector entrepreneurs will be the most disruptive because they can move the most quickly. They're the most likely to try new things. They're the most likely to go straight to the consumer and route around the thorny bureaucratic issues rather than fight through them, and pull change out the back door rather than push it through the front door. So if I was going to make a bet on the sort of biggest share of disruptiveness, I would go there. But I also think that in order for those entrepreneurs to really be successful, you need to have eventually, at some point, the cooperation of the institutions and all the other actors and to make it all work and make it all be sustainable. But we're talking about public institutions and society, and there are a lot of values and sort of moral issues built into how we architect our governance and so on, and so that makes it even more complex in this case. And I think you're going to see an increasingly prominent role of think tanks and other sort of advocates who are working to help steer the policies that shape all this in a direction that's beneficial for society.